The CoCo Crew Podcast is hosted by CyberEars. If you're serious about your podcast hosting needs, you should check out CyberEars. Whether you are a podcaster, a radio host, a musician, a narrator, an audiobook author, or simply a school, church, corporation, or anyone else with an audio recording that needs to be hosted or distributed, you should check out cyberears.com. Unlimited bandwidth, fast, reliable, and rugged servers with no hidden fees. CyberEars, your audio, your terms.
Listen, it's getting closer.
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet? Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
You're listening to the CoCo Crew Podcast, a delicious adventure into the world of retro computing news and information featuring the Tandy Color Computer. All right, welcome back to this episode of the CoCo Crew. This is episode 14. I am John Linville, and I'm, of course, joined by the indomitable Neil Blanchard. Say hello, Neil.
Hello, everyone.
I hope I used that word correctly. Indomitable, impossible to subdue or defeat. So that's not a bad word, huh?
That sounds pretty powerful.
All right. Welcome back, Neil. Welcome, everyone. This is episode 14 of the CoCo Crew. As we speak to you, the next CoCo Fest, CoCo Fest number 26, is just 9 months away. So if you were to go out and conceive a child, it would be born just about the time of CoCo Fest. So let's get our brains at least working on our projects that are like little children, and we've got 9 months to get them to where they come out at the world and scream and pee and poop all over the place. So speaking of projects, Neil, what have you been up to lately?
I have. I've actually been on vacation.
Vacation?
So some pretty hot weather in Key West.
Key West. Oh, my goodness.
Unfortunately, there's not much retro computing scene out there.
No. Did you have a cheeseburger in paradise?
Yeah, yeah. I was just scouting new places for a fest.
That might be fun. Let's see. What have I been up to? Mostly I've just been, I've been doing a little bit of acquiring and a little bit of supporting my son in his retro hobby. I think we've mentioned before that he's kind of into retro home console video games.
That's cool.
Yeah. So at one point he went out and found a Nintendo. So he likes he likes the Nintendo, the NES, but then he actually has gotten to where he likes the Famicom, which was the Japanese original version. At some point, he acquired a cartridge that runs on the Famicom called Family Basic, which in conjunction with a keyboard add-on allows you to program the Famicom in BASIC in a way that's very reminiscent of a retro computer like the CoCo or the Apple II or any other machines of the era. And so I've been supporting him a little bit as he tickles the keyboard, trying to learn a little BASIC on an ancient machine. So that's been fun. I had intended to finish working on a project that's will hopefully turn into a tech segment here related to using a receipt printer with a CoCo. But I still haven't quite got where I want to be on that. So
I'm looking forward to that one.
So I'm kind of in the summer doldrums in terms of actual projects, but hopefully get some things cleared out and start to move again on that sort of stuff. So what about eBay? Have you been doing anything on eBay or any other kind of acquisitions?
I had been following stuff on eBay. Haven't made any purchases, though. Missed a couple of good auctions.
Yeah.
I got a big Apple II lot just before I left on vacation. I know it's not really CoCo related, but it's retro.
Yeah.
That's about it. How about yourself?
Well, let's see. Well, I guess it's at least since the last recording, slightly before we released the last episode, I picked up an interesting item on eBay, kind of rare. That's a piano tuner cartridge that I'd never really seen these before. But it's a cartridge, plugs into your CoCo, and it has a microphone's input. And it comes with a manual that describes how to use some other associated tools for piano tuning. And so you use your CoCo in place of tuning forks, basically.
Awesome.
Very unique cartridge. The only problem, which is not much of a problem, I guess, but it's got a perfectly intact label. And so I have not had the guts to open the cartridge yet. So I haven't investigated what the actual circuitry is. But it's a neat little cartridge. Definitely a keeper.
You can always start an on-site piano business.
Yeah, if nothing else, right? Well, yeah, you don't see a lot of these. I found a few references in the various archives to people asking about them, but, definitely not something you see a lot of. Aside from that, not a lot of CoCo stuff. I did pick up a book on, it's called The Little Book of Basic Style, How to Write a Program You Can Read, dated 1978. So it's a book on programming style. Of course, it predates the CoCo, but it's an interesting little book. It's always good to, look at how things are done in other languages, even if it is something really ancient. But
I was going to say 1978. That's a great year.
Yeah, definitely. My eBay interests are far and wide, so I do have a few other things I've picked up, but nothing really pertinent to the podcast. Well, anyway, that's probably enough of an intro for this potentially long episode. So why don't we take a little break and be back in a moment with our announcements.
1, 2, 3, 4. I lose control because I'm cuckoo for you. Cuckoo for you. I'm cuckoo. Yahoo! I'm cuckoo for you.
All right, and we're back. This is the CoCo Crew. We are available on Twitter as at CoCo Crew Podcast. We also have a page on Facebook. And just search for the CoCo Crew Podcast, all separate words. In addition, we are, of course, available on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. So if you can't find us through our normal RSS feed, you can find us through those aggregators. Incidentally, if you'd like to go and leave us a review on iTunes or Google Play, I assume can do reviews, and Stitcher too as well. That would probably be handy for us and expand our audience a bit and help other people find our podcast. I think that'd be great. We are a member of the Throwback Network. The Throwback Network is a list of retro-themed podcasts. It includes a number of technology-related retro-themed podcasts centered around home computers and video game systems, but there are a few others in there related to other kind of retro stuff like The Greatest American Hero or other 80s culture kind of things. So if you're into that sort of topics, please go check out the Throwback Network. The link is, of course, available in the show notes. In addition, we are listed on the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. Again, this is a list of other similar podcasts, in this case, game-oriented podcasts covering arcade games and games for various 8-bit computer systems, both home computer and home video games. If you like to have podcasts about old games, old electronic games at least, then you would probably like to check out the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. Again, the link is in the show notes. We are, of course, hosted at Cyber Ears. So if you have a need to host a podcast or other audio recording, please check out Cyber Ears, where you will get your audio on your terms. If you would like to reach Neil or I to provide feedback for the show or otherwise ask questions or tell us how great we are or anything like that, you can reach both of us together at any of the following email addresses: show@cococrew.org, podcast@cococrew.org, or feedback@cococrew.org. If for some reason you would prefer to reach just one of us, I am available as John, John, @cococrew.org. And Neil is available, of course, as Neil, Neil, @cococrew.org. That is our standard set of announcements. We also would like to include announcements of upcoming to our general audience. As we record this podcast episode, if you are not already at Kansas Fest, you are missing it. So we're dropping Kansas Fest from the top of our list. I'm sure it will be back in the appropriate course of time. The next event coming up is Atari Party on July 30th of 2016. The Atari Party is an event to celebrate old video games. It has a hands-on living museum where a variety of classic game systems and computers and retro games will be showcased. Atari Party is a free event open to the public, hosted by volunteers from the local community, in this case, the local community around Yolo County Public Library, the Mary L. Stevens Davis branch in Davis, California. I've never been to the Atari Party. I hear about it on a lot of the other podcasts. Sounds like a great event. If I was in or near Davis, California, I would certainly be trying to go.
It's nice because they support other systems too. It's not just Atari stuff.
Yeah, pretty cool stuff. So anyway, the link is available in the show notes. Coming up on August 6th to 7th of 2016, Vintage Computer Festival West 11. And that's West XI for the non-Romans amongst us. VCF West is back. It hasn't been happening for a few years. I'm not sure how many, but several. Anyway, the event is on August 6th and 7th at the Computer History Museum on Shoreline Boulevard in Mountain View, California. If you're in the area, I advise going, if nothing else, just so you can visit the Computer History Museum, which is a great museum with lots of cool stuff. Unfortunately, they do not have a CoCo, so please scold them for not having a CoCo on display. They can be praised for having a dragon on display, but they are very close cousins, of course, but not exactly the same thing. So anyway, just a little bit of guff from the CoCo Crew. Feel free to mention us when you're telling them that they are lacking an important element of display.
And I'm sure if they need a CoCo, one of us can help them out.
I'm sure we can find out either to donate it personally or arrange for someone else to get them an item. Anyway, moving on. On September 10th and 11th of 2016, there will be the Vintage Computer Festival Midwest 11. Those are, of course, Arabic numerals because apparently there's no Romans in the Chicago area. This event, of course, is being held in the Chicago area, specifically at Elk Grove Village in Illinois. This is a vintage computing event. You'll have lots of old computers. I think the sponsoring club was originally a Commodore club, so it may be a little heavy on pets and VICs and C64s and such, but I'm sure it'll be quite enjoyable nonetheless. And I know they do welcome a contingent from the Glenside Color Computer Club, if nothing else. So go check it out. So the next event on October 21st through 23rd, 2016, and that looks like 3 days. The Portland Retro Gaming PRGE Expo, Portland Retro Gaming Expo. This will be held at the Oregon Convention Center in Portland, Oregon, or Oregon, as sometimes the locals say. This is a gaming event, a retro gaming event, covers a variety of old games, arcades, games, computer games, console games. It looks like a great event. If I was going to be in Portland, I would certainly try to go. I've contemplated arranging a cross-country trip to go to it. Don't know if I'll make it this year, but some year I'm going to if they'll just keep making these.
You should check it out one year.
They should. That'd be cool. Anyway, I'm sure it'll be a great event with or without us, but if you're out there, you may want to go and partake. So the next event, this is the Vintage Computer Festival Europa, November 19th and 20th of 2016. So this is, of course, a vintage computing event, but it is in Switzerland, apparently Zurich. I would really like to go because it's on my birthday. So we are sponsoring a Send John to Switzerland fund. Feel free to send PayPal.
That's a birthday gift right there.
That would be pretty awesome. No, but I do hear that there will be some representation, probably from the Fusix folks. Yeah, there is a Fusix contingent that'll be there, or Fusix or Fuzzix, however you want to say it. I don't know. I don't see a lot of mention of CoCo specifically, but I'm hoping there'll be some CoCo and or Dragon stuff there. If you are on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, I would highly recommend that you get to Zurich in November. Might be a little cold, but I think it'll probably be worth it. So, what do you think, Neil? You wanna head to Zurich?
I would love it. We can arrange that somehow. I wouldn't say no.
That would be pretty cool, but I don't know if I can't do Portland. I'm not sure I can do Zurich either. But I am still thinking about it because, like I said, it does cross my birthday.
Well, that seals the deal.
All right, and of course, the final event in our list here for now, on April 22nd and 23rd of 2017. Will be, of course, the 26th annual Last Chicago CoCo Fest. Those who are new to the show may not realize that they call it the Last Fest because they never know if there's going to be another one. But everyone so far is still the last. It's a little ongoing joke amongst us CoCo folks. But anyway, it is in the plan, the 26th annual event. It will be held at the same location, the Heron Point Convention Center in Lombard, Illinois. I think it'll be a great event. Planning has already started. We're hoping to include some representatives of the non-CoCo TRS-80s, and should be a cool event. Either way, I know John Strong has mentioned he's already working on some projects. I hope there's other people out there. I know there's some folks out there working on some stuff. So hopefully that's all going to come to fruition and be another great event.
I know it's still early, but I got a feeling it's going to be a good year.
Another good year.
Some of the projects happening already. It's the vibe is there.
We significantly increased our attendance last year. We didn't quite blow the doors off. So I think there's still some room. If you want to come and help us blow the doors off this year, I think it's worth trying. So, all right. Well, that concludes our announcements for this month. So we're going to take another short break, and we'll be back with some news.
CoCo. I'm in love with the CoCo. Fruity Pebbles, that's a no-no. Yeah, I'm in love with the CoCo. Captain Crunch, that's a no-no. Yeah, I'm in love with the CoCo. Yeah, I'm in love with the CoCo. I'm in love with the CoCo.
And we're back. Time for some CoCo news, huh? Once again, we have a very large, reasonably large news segment, I think. It would have been a lot larger. We actually went and did some pruning, and Neil actually had to help me with some of the pruning this time because it was just too much.
Off the hook for sure.
Yeah. And of course, after I said we were pruning news items, you're going to question me on this first one, but bear with me. I think it'll make some sense. So the first news item, the Waldorf Astoria in New York is to close for 3 years. This, the well-known New York luxury hotel is closing for 3 years and converting many of its rooms to condominiums. And so have we lost our minds? Why do we care about the Waldorf Astoria? Well, the tie-in here is it is the month of July 2016. 30 years ago, on the 30th of July, at the Waldorf Astoria, the CoCo 3 was announced. So this is just a little reminder that time marches on, things change, yada, yada, yada. So the Waldorf Astoria is back in the news, but this time kind of for a different reason. But anyway, just throw it in there a little bit lightheartedly, but I hope you'll appreciate that. And of course, he gave us a reason to reference the 30th anniversary of the CoCo 3. So
if those walls could talk.
If those walls could talk. Maybe who knows what kind of hidden CoCo prototype games might have been lost on this fateful day 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So anyway, our next item it comes from Mark Marlette. How about you take this one, Neil?
All right. Our next item is from Cloud9, Mark Marlette. It's a new firmware update for the Super Espectro. And anybody who doesn't know what that device is, it allows you to hook up a VGA monitor to your CoCo 3. And it also supports artifact colors. You can definitely get that update from Mark. I believe you can send it in to him, and he will do it for you for free. You just have to pay the postage and handling, of course. And if not, he has the firmware available, but you need is it the blaster?
Byte Blaster?
Byte Blaster? Yeah, I think you need the Byte Blaster to do it yourself.
Yeah, and of course, he said you can bring it along to CoCo Fest in 2017, and he will do the upgrade for free. And presumably at later CoCo Fest as well, if you still need it.
That's another perk right there to go to Fest.
That's right. That's why you need to come to CoCo Fest. So the next item, we have a report from Fedor Steeman that he has found, in his words, found another YouTuber who plays a lot of CoCo games without commentary, though. So I have a link to, he provides a link that points out to YouTube, the YouTube channel for someone who calls himself High Retro Game Lord. I haven't watched a lot of these videos. There do appear to be a number of CoCo games available, and a number of other retro game systems are represented as well. You check out any of these games, Neil?
I have. I checked out a few videos, and it's cool to see. Because it just goes to show a lot of people used to say that the CoCo wasn't really a games computer, but it shows that there was a lot of good games on the CoCo.
Yeah. How about that? All right. So moving on, I've got a link to a page out of Gamma Sutra. Gamma Sutra is a game kind of game business, game developer oriented website. But they have a link here to it's really to a video from the Game Developers Conference. And it's from PS4 to 1.44 megabyte floppy, porting Retro City Rampage to MS-DOS. So Retro City Rampage was a kind of retro-themed game that ran on more modern systems. From the title, I'm guessing it ran on the PS4, the PlayStation 4, and maybe some other modernish systems. But, like I said, it's kind of made as an homage to older games, and so it still looked kind of retro. But at some point, the developer took it upon himself to kind of make it retro or put it back to a more retro system. And so he ended up carrying it all the way back to run where it would run on at least an extended version of MS-DOS. So it's not really CoCo related, but It does talk about some of the things that you would have to do to take a more modern style of game and sort of do a combination of demaking the game, making, undoing parts of it, the fancier features, we're shrinking memory image sizes and using less intense algorithms for computations and that sort of thing. But he talks about the process he went through to actually get it booting up under DOS. So if that sort of thing might sound interesting to you, then you should go and check out this video at Gamma Sutra.
Yeah, that's awesome. Porting has always amazed me.
Well, it's going to be an interesting exercise, that's for sure. Okay, moving on. This was kind of a maybe a bit tongue-in-cheek article, but 16 ways tech was way better in the 1980s. So it's a little bit of a retrospective and maybe a way to tell the kiddos what it used to be like, that sort of thing. It goes through and talks about things like, your PC would always shut down without delay, and you didn't have to download a bunch of updates and such. Or you could record as much TV as you wanted just by changing out the VHS tape for a new one. When power went out, your phone still worked. Or you didn't have to recharge everything, you just would change the batteries, stuff like that. So it's kind of a cool article on some of that. It's a little opinionated perhaps, or maybe it's just tongue-in-cheek, but it's fun. What did you think of the article, Neil?
It's great. It's right up my alley. Sometimes my friends keep telling me I keep saying stuff like that. I love the 80s technology. I still drive an 80s car.
Yeah.
It's the simplicity of the stuff back then too, right? It just worked.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could definitely, there's a get off my lawn aspect to it, of course. But yeah, no, it's a cool little article. Moving on to the next link, we have a link. Let's see, it came to Facebook from via Lanny Fisher, brought it to Color Computer Group, shared by Bryce Tomlinson. Originally, I don't know if he had anything to do with the video, but anyway, somebody found this video, which is called Terminal Madness. It was a short documentary about people bringing their first kind of computers into their homes in around 1980. And how people were reacting to the computers in the homes, what they were trying to do with them. I think there was probably a reference to somebody trying to put recipes on whatever, and there's a guy in there who wrote a home control system to turn lights on and off, that sort of thing. But it's just an interesting period piece. It actually ran on local television in Minnesota or something back in the 80s. And it's got pictures of real people, and it's from Madison, Wisconsin, actually, not Minnesota. Same difference, right? Anyway,
don't tell Mark that.
Don't tell Mark, right? Anyway, it's got real people from back, 35 years ago, 36 years ago, reacting to computers when they were still kind of a new thing in the house. So it's an interesting piece to watch. I really enjoyed watching it. So if you're like me, maybe you'll enjoy watching it too. So the link is in the show notes.
I'm gonna have to check that out myself.
So we have a Twitter tweet from a fellow named Paul Rickards. I don't know Paul, don't know really what he's into. Apparently he's into 3D printing. and he must be at least somewhat into some old computers too. So what he shows is a picture. It says replacement plotter gears now available for Commodore 1520, Atari 1020, Tandy CGP 115, etc. And so he has these pictures of these three little plastic gears all together on the head of a penny, taking up not even a quarter of the space available on a penny, so quite small. So if you have one of these printers, particularly if you're listening to this show, particularly the Tandy CGP 115, and if you've got some broken, plotters actually, and if you've got some broken gears in your plotter mechanism, they may be a way for you to get some new ones. The link goes out to Shapeways. Shapeways is a 3D printing service where you can submit. You can do a lot of things there, including submitting 3D designs, and they'll actually produce them in plastic and send them to you for prices that sometimes are reasonable, sometimes may not seem so reasonable. You do have to factor in the cost of what it would take you to do them yourself without a 3D printer, which could be quite substantial, or the cost of buying a 3D printer so you can make them for yourself. We talk a lot more than I would have ever expected about printers and such on this show. And fixing them when they're broken is one aspect of it. So if you have a CGP 115 or similar plotter that is broken in this particular way, you may have a way to fix it.
So like I'm safe to buy the CGP 115 now?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, you still have to figure out where to get the pins, but it's not impossible, right? But,
our next news item is an announcement from Nick Morentis stating that his new game, Popstar Pilot, which I'm waiting for, by the way, I'm excited for that game, now works on the CoCo 3 FPGA.
Yeah. Yeah, so the CoCo 3 FPGA, obviously this is the attempt to re-implement the CoCo 3 or maybe an extended version of it on top of an FPGA development platform, which has had different kinds of success. They certainly can produce a system that will run on certain types of code, although some of it, the CPU emulation in particular, is not exactly cycle accurate with the real 6809. While it will execute 6809 code in general and can do so quite a bit faster, depending on how you've configured the system, if you have code that depends on how many cycles something takes, then it may or may not work properly on the CoCo 3 FPGA. Plus, there are features of the hardware that may have bugs in their implementation or may have had bugs in their implementation, are just not quite ironed out yet or haven't been tested. So Nick's been running some of his code on the CoCo 3 FPGA, and since he's working on this Popstar Pilot game, I guess he started running Popstar Pilot on there as well. And he's been, reporting problems and getting them fixed. So that's this milestone, is that his Popstar Pilot game works on the CoCo 3 FPGA. So pretty cool stuff, huh?
Yeah, it's great to see.
So what else are we hear about Popstar Pilot, huh?
He also has a new entry in his blog, Chapter 29. And he was mentioning about having to sacrifice some of the screens because of memory. But then he was able to get those extra screens put in and without sacrificing the detail.
Pretty cool stuff. And then he's having some problems with working with the joysticks, it looks like. But anyway, it looks like he announces at the end of these at the end of major development. And he's starting to get some play testing from, some normals, I guess, his family and such, and maybe some not so normals like Steve Strobridge and Curtis Boyle. Anyway, so hopefully testing will go well, and the Popstar Pilot will be available to everyone soon.
And his other question that he asked everyone, which kind of surprised me, was how many people use an NTSC CoCo 3 running a composite color monitor? I was actually shocked by the answers to that, the feedback.
Yeah. Well, what were you thinking would be the answer?
I wouldn't think anybody would use a CoCo 3 with composite. I don't know why I assumed everybody would use RGB, but I figured, you'd be using a CoCo 1 or 2 for composite.
Well, I mean, doesn't it default to composite when it turns on, the NTSC ones at least? Isn't that the default palette? Right. And I mean, if you if you never bought a CM8 or if you hadn't ever got, a Roy Justice or more recently a Ed Snyder or Mark Marlette video converter, then you wouldn't really have much choice. I do think Tandy made a really questionable choice with having the gimme output composites and then having to, this weird thing where the palette registers meant different things depending on, which video system was being used. And, they went the right way with the PAL machines, and they just always ran them in RGB, and then they had a board that would convert the RGB colors just to the, even if you have composite out on the PAL machines, it's not coming from the gimme, it's coming from a converter board that, is fed with the RGB colors. And, chips to do that have existed forever and are never, as far as I can tell, they were never that expensive. So I'm not sure why Tandy went with their own generation of those colors. Now, the only thing that somewhat makes sense to me is, in what sometimes will start an argument, is that it is the gimme generating composite on its own that enables you to have the 8 bits of color on a NTSC monitor. So the 256 or whatever the actual number is, but 8 bits worth of color information. If they were just doing RGB out with a converter, you'd never get more than 16 colors at a time. So
that's a good point.
So, the great question, did they know what they were doing when they did that? Did they ever mean for that to be the 256 color mode, or did they not? Yada, yada, yada. We may never know, but it's things like that kind of make me lean towards that yes, they did know what they were doing. And that, yes, that is the 256 color mode. But, maybe we'll never know. If you can prove me wrong with actual facts, then let's see it.
I have a feeling we're going to get some feedback on this one.
Maybe so.
All right. Our next news announcement is from Simon Jonason, and he's working on a 4-voice music tracker for the CoCo. I believe this isn't just for CoCo 3, is it?
I don't think it's just for CoCo 3. I think he had it running on CoCo 1 and 2 as well. I'm not sure about that, because I think that maybe using the CoCo 3's timers.
It doesn't say here.
It's not real clear from this link, so he may or may not, or he might have multiple versions. But I think primarily this is a CoCo 3. It's some of the work that he's doing for to feed into the work for Bouncy Ball 2 or whatever.
It is amazing. Like, if you haven't heard it, I suggest you check it out. The music is just amazing. Yeah.
Well, do you want to say what a tracker is?
Yeah, a tracker is it's the old mod files, music files from I guess the Amiga.
Mm-hmm. And so basically the mod files or tracker style players generally, and not all of them, the name kind of got bastardized a bit and mean different things. Or at least with the Amiga mod files, they actually contain samples and then information to sort of sequence the playback of the different samples.
Right.
So they that's the tracking. You kind of track the sequencing or whatever on the screen. So, but anyway, that actually makes them kind of ideal for playback on a CoCo, because we have the DAC instead of, our weakness is our strength, right? We actually can play samples very well because we rely on the CPU to play samples. It's the downside that we have to have the CPU play samples when we want to play a game and do things and play music at the same time. But if you dedicate yourself to playing the music, you can do some pretty cool stuff.
Right, exactly. And I think that's what he's working on. He has it down where it doesn't use much CPU cycle.
Yeah. So we'll see where that one goes. But like I said, I think it's supposed to feed into Bouncy Ball 2. And maybe some other stuff.
Well, our next news item is posted from Chris Wild, and he posted on Mashable, 1981 Radio Shack computer catalog. And I thought this was kind of interesting because Mashable is a pretty big app, I think, for the younger generation, and it's kind of neat that it gives us some exposure. It's not just an app, it's an actual website, but a lot of people have the Mashable app on their cell phones or tablets. I know my wife, she uses that all the time. She loves it. So having that exposure on there, you know what, it might get us a few more retro computer users.
Yeah, well, that's cool. At least, even if it doesn't create any new ones, at least communicates to everyone else that we're out here.
Yeah,
right.
We're still around, yeah.
Cool. All right, well, moving on, we have a link to our friend Stevie Strobridge. Stevie is a great guy. He has his various videos about the color computer. He always runs an ad for our podcast, and we should be sure to run an ad for Stevie as well. So anyway, I only have one link here. I think he went on to do some other how to install emulator stuff, but that was his quest. He was going to start doing videos on how to install emulators. He started with VCC, and I think maybe he was going to move on to XROAR and whatever else, MAME, I guess. Anyway, if you're not already familiar with Steve's work, check it out. He's got a nice setup for doing some videos. He's a pretty good personality, and he kind of comes at it as an everyday kind of guy. So he doesn't talk down to you or whatever. He's not. He doesn't lecture you from the high chair or whatever, like I might do. Anyway, so if you've been wondering, especially if you're new to retro stuff and haven't figured out emulators, you should definitely check out what Steve has to say and see if he can help you out.
I think it's great because emulators is a good way for people to start. If they're just getting into the hobby, don't want to, you don't know what it's all about, you can start with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so our next item actually comes from Brett Gordon. And Brett has been spending a lot of his retro time over the past year or so, maybe more, working on an alternative operating system called, well, what is it called? Is it called Fusix or Fuzzix or Fusix? I'm not quite clear, and every time I ask someone, they kind of laugh at me. So it's some sort of inside joke. But anyway, it's a Unix-like kernel for 8-bit systems. And I'm not sure what the primary development environment is, but we do have a CoCo 3 port at least that Brett is working on, and I think there's work on a CoCo 2 or Dragon ports as well, which may or may not require some hardware assistance to get more memory. Anyway, so Brett's part of his work there. We talked before about how part of his work he ended up toying around with some networking in the ping utility. This time he seems to have stumbled into some graphics work, and so he talks about creating a graphics viewer that runs under Fusix, and he's basically got it in basically a 1 bit per pixel, or it's basically a black and white style of mode, but it comes in as a 24-bit RGB bitmap, and so he has to go and convert it into something that's more displayable. And so he talks about how to do some dithering and some various alternative operations, and shows how it looked at the various stages. It's a pretty cool write-up. I enjoyed it. I've done some of this kind of graphics conversion on the CoCo, so I had a little more insight on some of what he was talking about. I could maybe predict where some of his options were going. Still quite enjoyable to read, and I don't know. Like I said, it's a cool write-up. So
it's amazing the work Brett Gordon is doing with I'm going to call it Fusix. It's really inspiring me to actually try it out. I gotta try this out.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. Actually, there's news today. The guy who kind of started Fusix is a fellow named Alan Cox, who I know from my work in the Linux kernel. He used to work with me at Red Hat. He was a big contributor to Linux in some of its earlier days, and continues to be a significant player in the Linux community. But the news that broke today, I don't know if it happened today or if it just was me seeing the links today, but he's been honored with, I guess, an honorary PhD from the University of Swansea there in Wales, which I guess is his alma mater. So way to go, Alan. Congratulations. Well deserved. And so this new honorary PhD is spending his time just like us playing with old computers. What do you think of that?
That's great.
Pretty amazing. All right, moving on. I've got an email link that was posted, a link to an email that was posted by a fellow named Ron Van Scherp. Sherpa. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that. Anyway, so he posts, where can I find a PDF version of Getting Started with TRS-80 Color Basic? And, and he says he checked Color Computer Archives, but it doesn't seem to be there. Well, pretty quickly, somebody said, well, no, it's here, and then, post a link. But the link that was posted actually was to a slightly different book. So The original CoCo 1s and probably the early CoCo 2s, maybe all the CoCo 2s, had came with 2 books. Well, if you just had Color Basic, it came with 1 book that was called Getting Started with TRS-80 Color Basic, or something pretty close to that. And if you had Extended Color Basic, then there was a second book that was called Going Ahead with TRS-80 Extended Color Basic. And so there were 2 books, and then eventually, and I don't know if it was in the CoCo 3 era or later in the CoCo 2 era, they combined these into 1 book, and it's called something like Getting Started with TRS-80 Extended Color Basic, or Tandy Extended Color Basic, or something like that. It's a slightly different name. So that one actually is in the archives, the later book. But the original, the Getting Started at least, and probably the Going Along, I don't think either one of them are actually in the archives as a scanned PDF. And this seems like a bit of an oversight. I know they're out there. The books are out there. There's multiple versions of the books. I probably have 2 or 3 different versions of the books. Shame on me. I haven't scanned them either. But if you're out there and you're the kind of person that likes to do some scanning and is looking for something to do, you should find these original Color Basic books and get them scanned in, because I really think they are really good books. They're they're just written at the perfect level for, kind of a smart kid, 10 or 12 years old, to be able to teach themselves basic in a very effective way for the era, and probably not a bad introduction to programming even today.
They're excellent books. I agree. I remember when I first got my CoCo 3, that's all I had. I mean, I had no programs, games, nothing to run, right? So all I had was that book. It really helped.
Yep.
It also helps with some commands, too.
Yeah, definitely some commands. But anyways, I mean, the one that is in the archive, the combined one, is pretty good. It has basically the same information, maybe not exactly the same. I think there were some times when I was trying to dig out information on interfacing assembly language code to BASIC, that there were a few details that were left out or different in one or the other of the manuals, whatever, but pretty much the same information. Anyway, still, it's a separate writing. We really should have that in the archives. So somebody get on that.
That's a project waiting to happen right there.
Yep. Somebody needs to present that at CoCo Fest.
All right, moving on to our next news item is from Jason Lee Steer, and he is worked on a PCB design for a Tandy joystick adapter in a D9 shell. And basically, it's kind of like the adapter that John came up with and I'm working on, but it's for a single joystick. You can use an Atari-style joystick on your CoCo.
Yeah, it's similar. Of course, it won't do the switching if you're using the Sega Genesis adapter. It's not going to allow you to switch over to the other buttons, at least as far as I can tell. Right. It does look like it's using 2 diodes for the buttons signals. So if you just wire them directly and use a Genesis pad, you can cause some conflicts with scanning the keyboard. But if you have diodes in there, assuming they're oriented correctly, which I assume they are, then that should at least work with the Sega Genesis. And like I said, you'll only have the B and C buttons. But if you follow the link out to Facebook, he has a link there to a GitHub page, and so he has a schematic PDF. He has some KiCad files out there as well. Yeah, so he has all the information out there. If you want to build these circuit boards, it looks like he has all the information available. It does say it's not yet tested, that he's waiting on boards from Osh Park.
And it looks like nobody wants to step up and get those DIN connectors soldered.
Yeah, he has that later farther down, right? It has a bunch of links to the different things, and he has a pretty good idea. If you don't mind maybe a little extra cost, is the Commodore 64 serial cables that they use for connecting disk drives, or I guess probably the printers and stuff as well, but certainly for the disk drives. The connectors on those Commodore 64 cables are the same as the connectors on the CoCo joysticks. So if you get one of those and cut it in half, that gives you 2 cables, which you can then use for converting an Atari joystick for use with the CoCo using a circuit board like this. So, that's a lot easier than trying to solder those connectors on, as I hear from someone who's done a lot of them.
Yeah.
Well, moving on to the next item is an announcement from Jim Gary. We talk about Jim Gary a lot. He's a very active member of the community. He focuses a little more on the MC10 portion of the community, the micro CoCo. A lot of times his code does end up on the CoCo 2 or maybe even the 3, but certainly the CoCo 2, because the basics are similar, and he will convert them sometimes, and anybody probably could do most of the conversions with a little bit of work. Anyway, he actually has been pretty busy this week or this month. We're going to talk right now about a program that he did some conversions on, which he's participating in a Retro Battle Stations July, which is July is basic month. The challenge Turtle Graphics. So Retro Battle Stations is some sort of thing over on Reddit where they have people do contests involving a variety of different kinds of old computers, and somebody, I guess July is designated for basic, and somebody thought it would be cool to come up with some basic code that does what they call turtle graphics. So basically just sort of like a vector graphic style of drawing that kind of has originated as with the logo language, and where they talked about moving a turtle around. So it gets called turtle graphics, whether it's part of logo or not. In this case, it's associated with basic. They put out a turtle graphics basic program, and then I guess Jim did what was necessary to convert that from the machines it was written for to where it would work on the MC10. I don't see it in the link here, I thought I saw someone had converted it to work on the CoCo 2 as well. But if it'll work on the MC10, it shouldn't be too hard to get it working on a CoCo 2, would be my guess. Anyway, it's pretty cool. So you can do, the turtle graphics kind of stuff. You can draw spirographs, some kind of pictures and whatever in BASIC. So it's kind of a cool thing. Wanted to mention that. Along with that, Jim has had at least 3 announcements of new games that he's been porting from other platforms in BASIC to the MC10. He had, he had one he's working on is called Flood, and another one is called like Shepherd Dog or something like that. So, and then he had at least one more. Anyway, so check out Jim Gary. He's got a page where he maintains his long list of games that he's ported from other systems to the MC10. Hopefully some of those will make it not only to the MC10, but to the CoCo 2. But anyway, it's cool. Like, Jim is a tireless guy on this stuff. Really works hard on that.
Moving on to our next item is from Mike Rowan. I think I've heard of that guy before.
Yeah.
And he made a
friend
video.
of the show. Friend of the show, Mike Rowan.
Yeah, friend of the show. He made a video he posted demoing the Ears voice recognition cartridge for the CoCo, made by Speech Systems. And it was kind of cool to see that, because I was lucky enough to get one from CoCo Fest from the auction. And I hadn't tried mine out yet, but I think Mike got his from eBay, and he did a really nice video on it. I had no idea it can do as much as it did. I mean, that's amazing technology from that time.
Yeah, it's pretty neat when it could be trained for different commands and such. I mean, I think that's the main thing, that you have to train it. So it's a little different from talking to your cell phone. You can't just say, "Okay, Google." I mean, you could probably teach it "Okay, Google," but probably not much else, right? Or Siri or whatever you want to say.
And the other cool thing that I learned from the video is that there's software to control for the appliances, for the X10 modules.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So you can actually train it, and you can talk to it and have it turn on a light.
Computer, lights on.
That's cool.
Yeah, not bad. All right. Well, you want to talk about his other video?
Yeah, and his other video is interesting as well. He posted on Cloud9's mini flash pack, demoing on how that works and how the software works to get ROMs flashed into that pack. And, yeah, it's very informative if you haven't or used that pack, or even if you have that pack from Cloud9, I definitely recommend checking it out.
Yeah. Yeah, the mini flash is a pretty piece of kit to have. Actually, it's kind of like the technology, I guess, started with the Super IDE cards. So those I think can work the same way as far as flashing the different images and such. In addition to having the Super IDE or the IDE interface on them, but it's kind of it's like it's the Rodney Dangerfield doesn't get enough respect. It's a pretty cool technology. It's been around a long time, it's sort of overlooked when people talk about, well, we need something that can do this or that. So we do already have this. It's not exactly what you're talking about, but you can kind of do the same thing. Yeah, you know what I mean? It's nice to be aware that that technology does exist and is out there, and Mark's selling it today. So
I use it pretty much all the time. It sits in my multi-pack. It's also would be good for game development too, I would think. If you want to, you can just flash your ROM in there and just use it for testing.
Well, yeah, especially if you're developing a ROM cartridge, sure.
Yeah, so instead of having to use burn EPROMs all the time, you just use the flashback.
Right.
And he has different colors available.
Yeah, right. Well, he paints them up and makes them available in different colors. Pretty cool. All right. Well, so the next link comes from it's Elliot Williams. It's over at Hackaday, and he's posted says the smallest basic computer. But basically, he's referenced which this has been around a while. I'm not sure why it suddenly made Hackaday, but he links to the computer designed by Grant Searle. In particular, Grant's 6-chip 6809 computer. And this is kind of, it's a neat exercise, a sort of a minimalist or kind of minimalist computer design around the 6809 CPU and just a little ROM and a little RAM and a serial port. One thing that makes it interesting, it says, it said it's running BASIC, right? Well, so the BASIC that it's running is actually Color BASIC or Extended Color BASIC that Grant has gone through and removed some commands from that aren't appropriate. So things like color and circle and paint and draw, because there's no graphics hardware, so they don't really make any sense. But it does have, it has all the normal basic control options, if and if then else and for, and, you can do, the CHR dollar or the other string manipulation stuff, and use RND for random numbers, all that sort of stuff. It's all just it's literally lifted from the Color Computer basic ROMs. And so anyway, it's kind of neat to see that get some attention. It's a 6809 and it is Color Basic. It's not exactly a CoCo, but it's kind of related. Gives you a little credibility with the non-retro folks, right?
Maybe call it a mini CoCo?
Almost. Yeah, that's a little bit of a stretch, but yeah. So they call it a MoCo or something. I don't know. Anyway. Our next link here, this is semi-chronological list, not exactly, but the link ended up here as I was accumulating links, but it's just a link to the episode 7 of the Trash Talk podcast, which of course is the crossover episode with the CoCo Crew. So Neil and I participated with Peter Satinsky and Ian Maverick, and we just had a discussion about retro stuff and talked about the business-oriented CoCos, the Z80 base, or the business-oriented TRS-80s, the Z80 base ones, and the CoCos, and just had a good time. Spent a couple hours talking to those guys, and so I think we're planning to run our version of that Again, they've already run the audio from that discussion as their episode 7. I think we're going to run our version of it, probably be similar, but not exactly the same, as a special episode. Hope to have that out for you sometime in August, and we'll see how that goes. But,
Yeah, it was a fun conversation. Time certainly went fast. That's a good sign.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so here's a kind of a random one from someone, John Barry, out on the Color Computer Facebook group. Says, I just noticed that Creative Corp, and that's K Creative and K Corp, has now added to their collection of TRS-80 fonts a complete set of CoCo fonts, including the 80-column CoCo 3 font. To my knowledge, these have never previously been available in TTF. That's true type fonts, I guess. So anyway, if you want to produce a Windows document that looks like it was written on a CoCo, there is a source of fonts apparently available from something called Creative Corp. I don't know much about Creative Corp. Do you, Neil?
No, I don't.
Anyway, it's not exactly my thing, but if you're into the font stuff like that, then you should go and check it out. All right, we have another link. This comes from Daniel Campos. It's certainly a rather active member of the community. It's centered out in Brazil. He's got a post to Clube Color Brazil Facebook group, which of course is in Portuguese, but get a little help from Google on the translation. He's got an item that at first glance appears to be a J&M disk controller, but if you look a little closer, it's got Codemex written on it. So what is that? So basically, he's got a clone of a J&M disk controller produced for the Brazilian market by Codemex. So it shouldn't really be as much of a surprise, considering how many clones of computers there were in that market back in the day. But this is just kind of interesting that extended all the way out to peripherals like disk controllers. So anyway, he's got it, and he's cleaning it up and trying to restore it to a more pristine condition, I guess. But that's pretty cool.
Definitely a good one to clone. J&M disk controllers, they're very good.
Yeah, well, it turns out I think it came with a ADOS on ROM. So very cool.
You could do some neat stuff with that.
Yeah. So the next link, I know Neil had kind of knew something about this was coming for a while, but John Strong has surfaced with a prototype joystick that if buttons were boils, this one would be rather sick. So he's got an arcade style joystick for the CoCo 3, and it's got the picture here. He's got 7 buttons on it. Wow. Then what are you going to do with 7 buttons? So I guess he's going to do some kind of fighting style game like were popular in the 90s. Those always had a lot of buttons, for different, punches and kicks and flips and that sort of stuff. And then I guess he's also got a little farther down, he's got a picture of a paddle controller that kind of looks like a bug or something that would sit in your hand. But so he's doing some experimenting with controllers. He doesn't seem to be quite ready to reveal the details of his design. We've talked a little bit. I think I have a decent idea of what he's doing in general, but I don't know the exact specifics of what kind of part values and stuff he's using. But anyway, he's got another option out there. It looks like he can support, so the way he's doing this, he can support a number of buttons and the joystick, a digital style directional joystick, all using just one of the original CoCo joystick ports. And so he can have 2 of these sticks, theoretically, with some number of buttons. Or if you split it up a little differently, you can have 4 sticks, or in this case, 4 paddles. He's talking about possibly having a Warlord style of game, I think. Hopefully I didn't let the cat out of the bag on that one. But anyway, so he's got some interesting controller options coming down the pipe. We'll see how that works out. Still got a long way to CoCo Fest. Who knows what else he'll come up with or what games he'll come up with that makes use of this. But that's cool. I still need to come up with some games to release that use the extra buttons on the Genesis controllers for the adapters that Neil and I worked on together. So I guess I need to get in gear on that, huh?
Too many projects, not enough time.
Too many projects. Well, that's for sure. All right. Well, so the next two items both come from Barry Nelson, and I suspect they're kind of related. So we're going to handle them together. So Barry Nelson announced mid-July, says, I've written a small assembly language program that can load a disk or cassette-based bin file smaller than a certain size from a 16K ROM cartridge. The listing is below, so he makes the source available. But so basically he's got a loader that would take a bin that would normally come off of a cassette or a diskette. You can wrap it up with this loader and put it into a ROM, and then you can have it execute as a ROM, but then run the program that was designed to run from a cassette or disk. So that's kind of cool. I could probably think of a few uses for stuff like that. How about you, Neil?
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so apparently Barry could too. So he's been working with Jim Brain on a flash cartridge. It's in some ways similar to the Cloud9 flash cartridge, but a bit different in other ways. It's got I think he's got more memory total available, so you can store a few more images on it. But it sounds like he's been working with his daughter, which is kind of cool. And he's written a menu program for setting up loading of the different images and controlling which one is active and that sort of thing. And so I can only imagine that he's also using his loader program to combine in there, so you can put disk and cassette images also on the flash. So if you put all that together, it's a pretty nice option. Theoretically, you could have a flash cartridge that plugs into your CoCo and runs both flash and diskette and cassette-based games. There certainly are flash cartridges for some other platforms that do that sort of thing. So it'll be great to see that show up for the CoCo. Hopefully that'll happen before long and be at a price that we'll all enjoy. What do you think?
Yeah, that's cool. You're right about the other platforms having that. Some of the game consoles have just that same sort of thing where you have all your programs and a little menu.
Yep.
Select what you want to run, and there it goes.
Yep, very cool. All right. So we have a link now for an announcement from David Ladd that he's got a YouTube page now set up where he's doing some CoCo related videos. So this is kind of similar to like a Steve Strobridge kind of deal, or maybe similar to the High Retro Game Lord. I don't know. He's got some playthroughs. It looks like he's just getting started on a few things, but he's got a playthrough of Pitfall 2 and one of Seamus. He's got 3 different ones of Pegasus and the Phantom Riders. Anyway, so we may have a new YouTube personality developing. He's got the kind of a unusual name here, Paco Otakte. I don't know if that's supposed to be some sort of play on the what is the term I'm trying to think of? Okatu or something that relates to anime, otaku, something like that.
All right.
Anyway, you see how much anime I know, but
I'm with you there.
I don't know if he's trying to relate to that or not, but anyway, he's trying to establish a beachhead out there on YouTube, and more CoCo content is always good for me.
Definitely.
All right, the next item comes from Jamie Cho. Seems like we've heard from Jamie once before, several episodes ago, and it seemed like he had some kind of promising game or something. I'm not really sure what happened there. I should go and figure that out. Jamie, what happened, man? But we are glad to have you back. You've done something pretty cool here. Some of us might be familiar with X Dally Clock, which was a kind of a a desktop toy or something that commonly seen on Unix workstations back in the 90s and maybe still today. Maybe available on some other systems, but basically it's a continuous display kind of clock application, a digital style of clock. And what's interesting about it is the numbers kind of transition by sort of morphing one number into the next. And so it's kind of it looks like something Salvador Dali would draw, like a melting face or something like that. So that's kind of the joke to call it X Dali clock. The X, of course, I think comes from X Windows, which is where most of us have seen it. So that's a Unix-oriented display system. So it's not really running on X, of course, on the color computer, but he's got the Dali clock running on the CoCo. I haven't run it on real hardware yet. I have run it on XRoar. It looks pretty good. A little bit slow, but what do you expect? Looks like his development's been done in CMOC, which is the C compiler or C-like language compiler from Pierre Sarrazin. This must be more C than C-like these days. If you can port to something like X-Dali clock, must not be doing too bad. So anyway, cool little project. It's it's eye candy or whatever, but it's cool that somebody's doing something. And Jamie, we'd like to hear from you. So just keep letting us hear from you. Let's see what else you've been up to, huh? What do you think, Neil?
Yeah, I was just thinking of a couple of different uses for that clock right now.
Oh yeah,
maybe do a little mod. The bedside table, a little LCD screen, and wedge a CoCo under the bed.
Oh wow! All right, well let's move on. So this link actually comes from Kevin Savitz. So Kevin Savitz, we actually have a bumper link from Kevin Savitz where he taunts us that, says hello to the CoCo Crew, and then says if you want to play with a real computer, play with an Atari. But so Kevin is, of course, a member of the staff, for lack of a better word, over at the Antic, the Atari 8-Bit podcast, and he appears on a number of retro-themed podcasts. And retro-themed events as well. So I've met him in person a few times, a rather nice fellow. On his Antic podcast, he has made a thing, shall we say, out of doing interviews where they've had over like 200 interview episodes over on Antic. So he's interviewed a lot of folks. But a few of the interviews he's talked about are centered around a number of pieces of software released from a company called Dorset Educational Systems. And Dorset I guess they originally made kind of programmed instruction stuff that was basically audio cassettes or audio tapes combined with like film strips. And if I don't know, if you're as old as I am, you probably remember film strips. If you're much younger than Neil, you probably don't.
I remember them.
Yeah, my kids don't know what film strips are, but for those in the audience who might not know what a film strip is, back in the day, you'd actually have a little projector, kind of like a motorized movie projector, only it wasn't motorized. It just had a little crank on the side, and you would feed it with film that's not unlike a movie film, but rather short, only a few dozen frames, maybe not even that many. And a film strip would be played alongside of an audio tape, and it would say, welcome to the film on whatever, on giraffes or something, right? And it would say, please change the frame when you hear the beep or something like that, right? And so it's a beep, and you flip to the next frame and say, the giraffe is a majestic creature native to this part of Africa. Beep, and you'd flip the frame and say, a giraffe has babies, once in its lifetime, or, these facts are completely made up, so probably wrong. But anyway, it'd be like that, where you just would listen, you'd look at a picture, almost like looking at a PowerPoint these days, but even less interactive than looking at a PowerPoint. So you just have one picture and somebody talking, and then once in a while the picture would change, and then there'd be somebody talking again, right? Well, so my impression is that's what Dorset did, but at some point they decided to get into the computer business with their programmed education content, and so they started taking some of this content and making it available on computer platforms. And so their main platform, or at least the main platform that anybody seemed to know of, was for the Atari 800. And so if you want to hear more about that, do check out the various interviews available through the Antic podcast. But so apparently in his research through whatever artifacts of stash or whatever he's managed to acquire, he came across some Dorset Educational Systems cassettes designated for the Tandy color computer. And so he's made these recordings available through archive.org with a bit of a challenge, saying, hey, I think these are for the CoCo. I don't really know how to test them. Maybe you guys do. Let's see if you can make them work. So he has a number of recordings there. It looks like there's one that's a program that's sort of like the interpreter kind of program. You need to load that first and then run the other tapes. The other tapes sound a bit different in terms of, just the tones they're using. So I suspect you need to load the interpreter first and then run the other tapes. And I think the interpreter probably, uses the remote control mechanism that the CoCo had, to where you can run the tape for a while and then you can pipe the audio out through the TV and then turn that off and then run the tape for a while to get more data and then switch it back to audio being on and play more audio, that sort of stuff. But so, yeah, and then so my imagination suggests that then you get that kind of experience on the CoCo where it'll put up some kind of picture and then it'll play the audio tape to tell you about the picture. And then it'll play the tape a little more with the audio turned off to load some more program, maybe load more graphic data or something. And then switch back and forth while you learn about funds in real estate or Edison's electronic inventions or the age of television or the electric car or history of computers or just do a math drill. So, I don't know, pretty interesting. Obviously it'd be cool if the artifact showed up on eBay, but I don't see that happening.
Right.
But if for some reason somebody suggested the audio sounded a little too scratchy, if you can prove that that's true, I'll bet we could talk Kevin into resampling them. We'll see. I listened to them. They didn't sound too bad to me as WAV files. They are available as WAV files. They're available in a number of other formats through archive.org. WAV is probably your best bet, would be my guess. But anyway, it's a really neat thing. I hope somebody will grab the ball and run with it, or maybe I'll find the time to grab the ball and run with it because I think it's pretty cool. But
yeah, I'm thinking the same.
So pretty neat stuff, and definitely a little snapshot into the past, not only of how computers worked or how people, this is back to a point where people were trying to figure out how to make computers useful to the common man. Beyond that, just the notion that this would seem useful to the common man is sort of a window into how things were back in the day when you had film strips. Right? So pretty cool. So very exciting. Thank you, Kevin, for making those available to us. And I really hope some of us will find a way to at least try to take you up on your challenge.
All right. Our next news item is from Rick Adams. And it's kind of legendary in the CoCo scene. Programmed a couple other games. He did the Shanghai game for the Color Computer 3. Anyways, one game he worked on that never got released was called Bomb Threat. And it has been found, well, sort of. And I guess what he was saying in the news thread is that he had two of his sons over, and they remember playing the game, and they found it on an old VCR tape. They played it, so it's actually, there's a video they posted online, proof that it actually did exist. It says, copyright 1984, Rick Adams, Bomb Threat.
That's pretty cool, huh?
I love seeing stuff like this.
It'd be nice if we could somehow find a disc somewhere, but we're shy of a disc. At least we have some kind of a blueprint for how the game worked, right? Maybe somebody could clone it if we had access to the video.
Do a recreation.
That'd be kind of cool. I don't know. We definitely want to talk to Rick at some point on the show. Maybe this can be a point of discussion. Looks like a little farther down in that link, he has a link to some actual video, not just a static picture. So, in fact, there's some comments in there from Dale Lear as well, and Nick Morentis, and lots of interesting people commenting on that thread. Very cool. All right. Well, so the next link we have is it's a link to an email post that started a thread over on the CoCo mailing list. It comes from Darren Atkinson, and Darren, of course, is the creative mind behind the CoCo SDC, as well as a few other things. But he posts a link that just had links to a couple of pictures, and they were one was to a populated CoCo cartridge PCB. Not a lot to indicate exactly what it is, though you can tell that it has a battery, and you can tell it has a 32 kilohertz crystal, which would be typical of a real-time clock. In fact, you can see the chip is labeled for the real-time clock. A couple of microcontrollers on there, which is a little unusual to have two, but what's all about, right? And then another picture was of a bare board, and you can read a little bit more. It's not actually two microcontrollers. It's a microcontroller and an SRAM, okay? And there's a header block marked sound PWM. What's that all about? Of course, there's a little CPLD, I think is what that footprint is for. Well, anyway, after a little prodding, it comes out, and of course, the top of that PCB is labeled CoCo SDC 2. Yeah, well, that sheds a little more light on it, right? So this is basically a rev of the CoCo SDC, and looks like it might have some extra functionality, a real-time clock, and it's got looks like it might have the ability to play audio samples. So that might create an opportunity for some new games that take advantage of that. Let's see. What else did he say that this was going to do? Do you remember, Neil?
The other thing that I notice here, I think it's safe to say, which is kind of exciting if this is true, but the one picture shows it in a nice red shiny cartridge shell.
Yes, that would be quite exciting to be able to sell some of those off. It would be nice to move some of those cartridges. It looks good in there. So it says a flashless SDC. Not really sure what that means. Real-time clock, PWM sound capability, smaller form factor, fits inside Super Pack cartridge case, provided you cut out the required openings, which would at least cover the SD card. So pretty cool. And obviously the CoCo SDC has been a very popular peripheral in the CoCo community over the past couple of years. This looks like a turn of the screw, so to speak, on that basic technology. An improvement without going way off in the weeds. Sounds like the PWM may still need a little refinement before it's usable, but I assume that can come. And it's pretty cool. I'm looking forward to that.
Same here. I believe the flashless probably means he dropped the flashbangs.
Oh, the CoCo SDC had flashbangs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's missing that functionality, but adds the other. Okay, that makes sense. So very cool. So definitely looking forward to this new thing from Darren, and we'll see who ends up manufacturing it and all that sort of thing. But yeah, nice to have that enhancement in the community. See how many of those we can get out. All right, moving on. Next item comes from someone who might be interested in doing those productions. Ed Snyder posts a link, an inside look at producing the CoCo VGA. Has a link to a video out on his Google Drive. Need to tell Ed about YouTube, I guess. But it shows how he's laying out solder paste and placing parts and preparing his CoCo VGA boards. So it's interesting. If you've never seen that process, it's definitely interesting and educational. A lot of people seem to enjoy it. So very cool. Good on you, Ed. Appreciate you sharing. What'd you think, Neil?
Yeah, I think it was great.
All right, and the last news item link I have, it comes from Jim Brain, who also is playing the Let's Post a Link to a Picture game. And his picture is also to a couple of circuit boards. The circuit boards that he is showing, along with a small CPLD or Xilinx part, and the rest of most of the board is actually unpopulated, so obviously they need a little construction, but they do have There's two boards, but they each have a Crystal Land CS8900 chip on there, CS8900A, which of course is an Ethernet. What's an Ethernet MAC, and the layout around it suggests that there'd be an Ethernet. The extra hardware for actually establishing Ethernet connections. So he's looking at a prototype Ethernet card designed for the CoCo. So that's pretty exciting. And he, his post addressed Brett Gordon specifically because he had done that work on getting ping working in software over on Phusix. Although a little typo, actually, he's addressed Brent. So hopefully Brett knew who he was talking about.
Had me confused at first.
But anyway, so maybe these will get out in the community. If Brett doesn't want one, I'd like to have one. Well, actually, I'd like to have one whether Brett wants one or not. We'll see how that goes.
Maybe someday I'll be able to do IRC on the CoCo.
Well, you can kind of do that now. You just have to go through DriveWire, right?
True.
But anyway, well, how's that for news? I think that covers quite a bit of news for today. What do you think? Is that enough news for now?
That was a good roundup.
All right. Well, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with some feedback.
Okay, but why Tandy Compute?
I'm sorry, I had the turntable at the wrong speed. You want to try it again?
Okay, but why Tandy Computers? In a word, quality. We do it all, from custom-designed semiconductors to the finished product. Tandy business computers are manufactured in our own USA plants. We test and retest and test again to ensure one of the highest standards of quality in the industry. And Radio Shack provides total service and support. I'm convinced.
Tandy Computers at Radio Shack Computer Centers. In business, for business.
Okay, now it's time for some listener feedback. We have quite a bit of feedback this time around. I'm not sure if that's good or bad. Probably good. Hopefully it doesn't mean we've been doing a bad job. People mostly say nice things, so I guess we're doing all right. So let's just go ahead and start. Our first feedback, of course, comes from our friend of the show, Mike Rowan. And Mike has always got a friendly thing to say. He says, great interview in episode 13, of course, referring to the Wes Kuzmal interview. He says, enjoy the tech segment and the review of Shanghai. So just a nice warm pat on the back from Mike. Mike also sent us an extended audio feedback that we may actually turn into a guest tech segment this time, talking about obtaining some printer ribbons. So stay tuned to hear that. Got a couple of responses to our discussion about whether or not it's fair to give discounts at CoCo Fest. L. Curtis Boyle says, it's been a tradition to sell stuff at fest/trade shows cheaper from way before even Rainbow Fest, parentheses, Comdex, etc. I think it helps encourage people to make it out. Well, of course, I agree. And I think Neil agrees there. Yeah. I'm not sure that makes it any fairer, but it certainly is a tradition, and I'm sure it'll continue as well. John Strong also chimes in. He says, don't have to pack merchandise back home, need to cover expenses, don't have to pack them to the post office, encourage people to come to the CoCo Fest. A little terse perhaps, but I think John's kind of in the same boat with the rest of us. It's like, reality is, we're going to do it. It does benefit the seller some. So, I mean, it's not entirely just, out of the goodness of their heart. So whatever, I think it'll continue. Good old Aaron Wolf. Aaron has kind of a dry sense of humor. So hopefully take that with a grain of salt. He says, thanks for all the work you've put into the podcast and other sketchy ventures. Some of them might work out. So pretty sure that's Aaron's way of saying, hey, keep up the good work. And he really enjoys it.
It's great to hear from Aaron.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to see you at CoCo Fest again.
Yeah, we need to get Aaron back at CoCo Fest. Well, he took on some kind of some personal responsibilities that may have been keeping him back a little bit, and they're the kind of personalities that sort of age out over time. So maybe eventually he'll be back at CoCo Fest with us. So anyway, all right, we have a feedback from Per Surratt. I think last episode we talked about that he had done some work on to help that CoCo SDC be able to use the VDK images. Previously, even if you would had it in Dragon mode, it's still expected to use DSK images, I guess. And so he expanded his DOS Plus 5.0 extender to understand VDK images. I think I've got that right. I don't know. Maybe I should go back and listen to my own podcast. Anyway, it says kind of cut him, edit him a little bit just for the space on the listing here, but it basically says Dragon users that bought a CoCo SDC are not very happy to have their disk collection doubled. That's why I made the upgrade in my DOS Plus 5.0 extender. So yeah, so it makes sense. So if you want to use a Dragon, you want to use the Dragon, right? So it makes sense. So in open source terms, it was an itch that needed to be scratched, and so Per scratched it. Very cool. Okay, so our last feedback item comes from a new listener I've never heard contact from before, Kevin Braun. Braun says, maybe you could pre-announce what games will be covered next episodes so listeners could have a month to find the game and play along. So I think that's kind of a reasonable idea. I think Neil might be like me, where he's not always sure what he's going to review next month. So it may not be as practical as it sounds, but I think it's worth considering as a suggestion. What do you think, Neil?
Well, for sure. And a lot of times I do know up ahead what I'm going to do, but there is that spontaneous. Sometimes you change your mind the last couple of days before the recording.
Yeah, like this month probably. Oh, well, if only everyone knew what went on behind the scenes, huh?
Yeah.
So anyway, well, all right. So thanks. That's a good feedback segment. A lot more feedback than usual. We definitely enjoy getting the feedback, especially feedback like Mike's giving us that we might can turn into another show segment. So I think we're going to close the feedback section here and have a little word from our sponsors, and then we'll be back probably with our host discussion.
Hi, I'm Kevin Savitz of Antic, the Atari 8-Bit Podcast. You're listening to the CoCo Crew. When you're ready to play with a real computer, play with an Atari.
All right, well, we're back once again with a host topic to discuss. We kind of, I don't know if we just enjoy hearing ourselves talk. I hope the listeners are enjoying hearing us talk about these things, but usually we get a little feedback on our host discussions, so somebody must like them. So anyway, we're going to do another one way or another. We're going to do another one this month. And so the topic we've come on this time is, I guess, again, in the form of a question. Are paper magazines worth keeping? And so hopefully that's clear enough, but if not, I know when I started as a kind of a CoCo collector, that was what everybody was working on, was making sure they had complete collections of the Rainbow magazine. And the people who already had complete collections of Rainbow were working on the collections of Hot CoCo and the various other magazines. But at some point that sort of dropped off, probably about the time that decent PDF scans became available of the Rainbow and the other important magazines. And you can't deny that PDF does have a lot more practicality to it. You can pack them up into, a tiny space, the size of an SD card. You can carry them around. You send them over the wires across the world. Some of us are not quite as comfortable browsing a PDF as we are browsing a paper magazine, but I'm comfortable enough with it that I'm not sure that by itself justifies keeping the paper magazine. So we're going to throw it out there. Neil, what do you think? Do you have a collection of paper magazines? And if you do, I have to ask you why.
Well, I'm pretty sure you know my answer on this one. I'm definitely going to say yes. It is. It is worth keeping them.
Yeah.
At least that's how I feel.
Of course,
And
you also feel that way about floppy drives and CRT monitors, right?
Well, that's why I figured you kind of knew where I was going with this.
Yeah.
But no, I do have a complete collection of the Rainbow Mag, and working on Hot Cocoa as well, and Canadian Color, a few others. The reason why I like to have the originals is I just have a tough time reading from the internet. I don't know what it is. I mean, I just don't find it the same. And when you're flipping through, you got the feel of the paper, and you can actually see the articles. And I like a lot of the advertisements. And sometimes I notice on the scans, those ads get chopped off.
Yeah.
So it's kind of neat, to actually see the the markings of the old companies and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the downside, they do take a lot of room.
Yeah, they definitely do that. Well, I know what you mean. I mean, the scans are available, but they're not all necessarily of the highest quality, although most of them are certainly good enough. But once in a while, you get a scan that has, like you say, somebody might have helpfully went and chopped out the advertisements. Or you get a scan where you had a lot of bleed through. Once in a while, you might have a scan of a magazine that was actually damaged and you're missing pages or something like that.
Right.
So if you have the original in your hands, usually you're going to have a better experience, where if you really want to look close in on something, if you want to put a magnifying glass on it, you still can. But realistically, if you have a 1600 DPI scan or whatever, do you need a magnifying glass? You just blow it up, right? Most of the people doing scans are pretty conscientious. You might occasionally have, a problem where you've missed a page or something like that, but mostly the stuff's there. You might have a dog-eared page where somebody bent the corner down over a few words or something like that. But most of the time, you can't really complain that much about the content, right? Especially since it's electronic and you don't have to store it. You don't have to trip over it. You don't have to worry about it catching on fire.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about it being infested with bugs or something like that.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's not happening to too many people, but I suppose it could.
And I had lost my first Rainbow collection back in the day when I was, when I first had the CoCo. I had the complete collection. I came home and my hot water tank let loose.
Oh, yeah.
So, and of course, I had the magazines on the floor, and I'm sure you know where that went.
Yeah.
I tried drying them. I had fans out, but the paper just wicked it right up.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I do I'm like you. I do have a lot of paper magazines. Many of them I acquired before the scans were readily available. And, so just haven't gotten rid of them, but I'm not really in any hurry to get rid of them either, at least the ones I have. And in fact, occasionally I still buy new to me magazines of different types that I don't already have. Not that long ago, I bought a small collection of Random's 6502 or Micro, the 6502, 6809 journal. Or we've talked about this on the show, and those are that was a month after we just had announced that the every issue was available on PDF from the original publisher. And still I bought a small collection of them. So there is a comforting thing to me to be able to hold it in my hand or fold it out in my lap or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then part of it's, 44 years old and I've learned to read on paper and still comfortable doing that, and more comfortable doing that than I am on any electronic format. I don't know if that will ever really change, but, when you have the paper magazine you get a certain smell from the paper. It's the ink in the paper. And some of it may be the mold of the years or whatever, but it adds to nostalgia, which is part of the hobby. You can't deny that nostalgia is part of all this. There's something there, right? I can't say that things are any better than an electronic copy. I feel like I get more utility if I'm working on a project, for example, and if the project's based on something in a magazine article. I feel like I get more utility out of having the magazine open on the desk than I do out of having the PDF open on the desktop. But that could just be me imagining things,
No, I agree.
Yeah.
And I guess we can also relate this to books as well.
Yeah.
As I know you got a nice book collection over there, textbooks and a reference.
Yeah, and I would like to have even more period books. Occasionally, I'll come across a title that I've never heard of and try to track it down. Sometimes I get those, or occasionally find something on eBay that I've never seen before, like that book I have on spreadsheets in the CoCo. That's crazy. I should talk about that at some point, but yeah, books and magazines, actual paper books and magazines, they definitely have a place in my collection. They have add to the nostalgic feel or whatever. The other thing is they have presence. You know what I mean? The book's on the shelf. At some point, I'm going to look at the book on the shelf. I got a PDF tucked away in my Dropbox account. I may never look at it ever. You know what I mean? Or my Google Drive or wherever.
You see that spine looking at you on a bookshelf, and you're like, hey, I want to read that.
Yeah. And it may just look back at you at just the right time when you're working on a project or something too. Whereas I don't think you really have the same experience when you're looking through a directory at file names,
True.
And so that's true for a book. I'm not sure it's quite as true for a magazine. I guess it depends on how you have your magazines displayed. I've got a number of those rainbows in those red binders, and I don't have them up on a shelf like I ought to, but someday I hope to. And I've got enough of the red binders that I think I can put the rest of my rainbows in there.
Oh, that's amazing!
And maybe even a few other magazines. The red binder, if you're not familiar with those, back in the day, it was pretty common. You'd see back when libraries, which maybe they still do, but when libraries would have periodical collections, when they would get to be a certain age or whatever, they would bind them in these, basically like a big book. And at some point, I guess, Rainbow Magazine made some of those binders available emblazoned with actual Rainbow Magazine logos, and they're a little hard to find these days.
I was just going to say, I think that's a rare item. I don't see that. It's not too common.
Yeah. I have, like I say, I'm not sure how many I have. I'm pretty sure I have more than I need. I have enough that I would be happy to trade some number of the red binders in exchange for program pack files. So if you have a program pack file and would be interested in some red binders for your Rainbow Magazine collection, please contact me. Do not contact Vincent Tran.
Or if you have an AgVision terminal.
An AgVision terminal would also be most welcome. Or a TRS-80 electronic crayon video display device. Those would all be most welcome. Seriously.
How I feel, and maybe I shouldn't say this, I might get blasted for it, but looking at magazines or books in digital format on PDF reminds me of using an emulator.
Yeah, well, it is kind of like that. In a sense, that's what a PDF reader is, right? Is a magazine emulator.
Right.
And so I think I know what you mean. It's like it's similar enough to be useful. Mm-hmm. If you just want to pick up the information, you certainly can pick up the information that way. And there's certainly nostalgia to be had from reading the old articles in whatever format they are, right?
For sure.
Like I said, it's just a little sterile. It's like you're cutting yourself off from the full experience by using that. And, certainly nothing against PDFs. Archive.org is out there scanning as much stuff to PDF as possible and doing a great job, and hopefully preserving some remnant of that history for people 1,000 years from now if anybody's interested in it.
Yeah, we need that. That's true.
But I'm not going to live 1,000 years. I'd be lucky to live a full 100 years, right? And so for my collection, for my education or remembrance or whatever, I'd still like to have the magazines on paper and the books too.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that.
Well, did that beat it to death? We're in too much agreement. There's not enough controversy. We won't get any good feedback over that.
Yeah.
Well, there's bound to be...
didn't have any differences on this one.
Yeah, well, there's bound to be somebody out there who disagrees, who thinks it's stupid to keep the paper around, that we ought to recycle it back into newsprint or whatever. So, let's hear from you. It's probably some millennial that's treating retro computers in some sort of hipsterish way and wearing a long beard and glasses with no lenses in them. They're literally trying to be a little insulting and provocative, but see if we can rouse somebody out to fight with us on this one. So if you hate paper magazines, think we're fools for liking them, please write in. Please tell us. Please send us an audio response. I would love to hear it.
That'd be great.
But
I would also like to hear if you do like paper magazines, if you also like looking at the ads like myself, if you get a kick out of that.
Yeah, looking at the ads can be as good as reading any of the information in the articles. That's for sure. It just puts you back in the period, back in the day, or whatever. Sometimes it helps to put perspective too. And when you get somebody who says, you'll hear historical stuff, particularly like retro themed podcasts, but even other historical references like, well, in 1983, this cost, $25. That's like $5,000 today. It's like, well, maybe it is, maybe it's not. When you see the floppy disk cost $25 or a box of them, and now you wouldn't pay anything for floppy disks. Does that change the equation? I mean, obviously, I know how these things work. Please don't write in telling me about basket economics and baskets of goods and that sort of thing. I don't want to hear that. But anyway, yes, reading the magazines and flipping through the articles can be quite illuminating. Flipping through the advertisements can be very entertaining as well. All right, well, have we beat this one to death?
I think we did. We got it.
All right. Well, that brings our host discussion to conclusion, and we're going to take another break, and then you'll probably hear some combination of technical discussions and or game discussions. The truth is we haven't quite settled all that just yet, but I'm sure it'll be ready by the time you get the podcast.
This is the mixed up month.
Exactly.
Let the Radio Shack TRS-80 put the world of color computing into your home. Instant loading program packs turn any color TV into an exciting game arcade. And there's more. The color computer is an educational aid, a home management tool, an up-to-the-minute electronic information service. The programmable, expandable TRS-80 color computer from $399 only at Radio Shack, the biggest name in little computers.
Okay. All right, as we've already mentioned, this episode is a little unusual. We both have had some vacation time and scheduled demands and that sort of thing, so we're mixing things up a little bit. I believe we're probably going to have a tech-oriented section coming as audio feedback from Mike Rowan. I had some other technical stuff to talk about, but kind of a little behind where I wanted to be on that. And then Neil mentioned that he was a little behind and didn't have a good idea for a game segment this time. And so I threw out the idea, well, I could talk about one of my games, and Neil kind of jumped at it. And so normally I wouldn't want to promote one of my own games here, but since it's a kind of a unique situation, I said, well, why not? And since it's me, I'll talk a bit about the game, but I'm going to go ahead and maybe talk a little bit about the technology involved or the technical underpinnings of the game as well. So enough of that. The game we're going to talk about is, of course, Follow CoCo, which is basically a Simon-like game, a very much Simon-like game, that I produced for the CoCo, and it's been through a couple of iterations, so I figured it might be fun to talk about. It's actually a pretty simple game, and probably everyone's already familiar with that from the gameplay perspective. I think it matches pretty well its role model, shall we say. But I think it is a fun game to play, and it's a good way to make a little use of your CoCo and just sit around and enjoy it some. So anyway, on with the show here. So what is the origin of the Follow CoCo game? Actually, or the original game was something there called Follow Me, which Follow Me was sort of an homage to kind of the origins of the Simon game and the Atari alternative. Whatever. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you may want to just Google for Simon and Follow Me and, enjoy the story as it comes out there. Anyway, well, this was a project that I worked on for the Retro Challenge 2013 Winter Warm-Up. So that was January of 2013, so about 3.5 years ago at this point. Anyway, the real project, or maybe not the real project, but the motivation for the project actually was a little hardware project where I produced a rotary controller for the CoCo. And so by a rotary controller, I mean a spinner, and I do not mean a paddle like you would use to play Warlords on the Atari 2600, but I mean an actual spinner like you'd use to play Tempest, or maybe a Mega Race, or a few other games in the arcades. And so the difference being that whereas a paddle like the Atari 2600 is usually just a potentiometer, and most importantly it rotates until it hits a stop in one direction, and then you can rotate it in the other direction until it hits a stop, but you can't just continuously rotate it in one direction. Where in this case, I produced a rotary controller, built around a rotary encoder, which lets you continuously rotate in one direction. And then the signals that comes out of that, of course, are a bit different, quite different than a potentiometer. They're, really kind of a offset set of square waves that by checking out the signals and watching the order they appear, you can determine both the speed and the direction in which the device is turning. I'll put a link in the show notes to the project blog so that anybody wants to check that out can go look at it. It's a kind of a neat little project. It didn't work out super well. I've thought about maybe revising it or going back at it, but just haven't got around to it. Anyway, Boise did build one, so that was kind of cool. So Boise and I both have the controller, so maybe one day at least one or the other of us will produce a game that we enjoy. But anyway, I had built this controller and decided I needed a game to exercise it, and was sitting around thinking, well, what kind of games are there that can benefit from that sort of spin around option? And I was sort of thinking around games kind of like Tempest that where you are basically like tube shooters or whatever, but it was a little more complicated than what I wanted to do at the time. So I for some reason settled on the idea of Simon, and of course the original Simon and most of its variations, I think, come with a circular case with the buttons that are, well, not really on the outside. They kind of split the whole thing into sections, but yeah, I imagine you can think of how you could just rotate the case around and press the button closest to you. For some reason, that seems similar enough to a rotary control that I thought it would make a good use of it. And so I built a game around that, and you could just use the rotary controller to spin around the game, and I had 4 blocks on the screen for the different colors, and as you'd spin the controller, it would highlight a given block until you turned a little more in either whatever direction and moved to the next block and highlighted that in white to indicate where you were on the on the screen or whatever, and then a button press would indicate that's the color you wanted to pick for the next in the sequence. And so you could play it. It was kind of fun. There were, like I said, there's some shortcomings with the controller, but I also added in to kind of make the game available to people who didn't have the controller. I also added in a keyboard control option to where you could use the W, E, S, and D keys on the keyboard, and they kind of skeuomorphically map to the colored blocks on screen, so you could select them and play with just a keyboard if you want. So that's Follow Me. It's I made it available for a free download. I'll put the link in the show notes for finding Follow Me download through the tuxdriver.com website. I actually made the source available for Follow Me as well, and there's a Git repository out there, and I'll put that link in the show notes as well. But so there it's at, kind of dormant. And then I guess it was a little more than a year ago, or a year and a half maybe, we started talking about CoCo Fest 2015, and there was talk of a 4K coding contest, which at first didn't appeal very much to me, because 4K systems are rather constrained. But then there was talk that, well, if you had a 4K ROM image, that would be good enough, and that got me to thinking about some of my programs I'd already done that might fit into the ROM image, and then I thought of Follow Me. I thought, well, that might work, and it's probably small enough it could be 4K with whether it's a ROM image or not. But anyway, I was kind of already thinking of ROM images at that point. That was the year I first released a plastic cased Farfall cartridge. And so I was looking for some other things I could put into cartridges, and so I got to looking at the Follow Me source code and started revising it a bit, repackaged it so that it would run from the proper location to be a ROM image. I dropped the rotary control support because, realistically, only Boise and I had controllers. And so with that, I also then don't have a white outline for the selected boxes, because now there's no box selection until you hit a key anyway. I changed the keys being used, so now instead of W, E, and S and D, I picked those originally because it's sort of similar to the WASD control layout that a lot of people are used to for adventure games. But it's more suitable for your left hand, and I'm right-handed, and it's just easier for me to move to the other side. So I set up to where you can now use I, O, K, and L as the keys, because it fits the right hand. And the biggest change I made, I guess, is instead of just plain colored blocks on the screen, I put the letters that match to each block in the corner of each block, so you have an on-screen indicator of which key to press to select a given block. I think that was a really nice UI enhancement. Anyway, so that became Follow CoCo, just mostly to differentiate it from the earlier Follow Me. But that's it. So how does it play? Well, it's basically Simon. And so once you start the game with a key press, it will indicate a color by the blocks have a space around them, and it'll indicate the color by making the indicated block bigger. Essentially, like the green block, it'll draw a green box around it, making it bigger. If it wants the red block, it'll draw a red box around that, making it bigger. And of course, it plays a tone that corresponds to the color. And this is essentially the Simon game. If you're familiar with it from the 80s or even the 90s or whatever, they're probably still for sale, Toys R Us or whatever these days. But it's a memory game, and it plays the tone and color combinations, and you guess one, then it'll play two, and if you get those two right, it'll play three, and if you get those three right, it'll play four, and on and on. It does get a little faster after after you successfully remember a sequence of 5, and I think it gets a little faster after a sequence of 13, and then if you make it all the way to 31, you kind of get a win, which is maybe not as everything it should be. I think it just sort of goes do. But anyway, it does indicate that you won, and you can play again. Let's see. When the game is in between games, when it's waiting for you to play, it does give a little homage back to Simon. It puts on screen, it says, "Simon says, press any key." Unlike some variations of Simon, there's no real variations to the game. You're always sort of playing the same game. Some implementations have a few different variations, including just playing by tone or going in reverse sequence and that sort of stuff. But this program does not offer any of that. It's all just pretty simple, straight up, normal style play, shall we say. In terms of technology, the graphics display is all the semi-graphics 4, the semi-graphics display that's available in BASIC. So large colored blocks that in this case we use them all completely full. But so large colored blocks. There is text mixed in on the screen for the letters that indicate which key to use for each block and or for the Simon Says stuff or whatever. Let's see, the keyboard scan does use the ROM routine at hex A000. So that has a nice effect that automatically gives you CoCo or Dragon support. The physical key matrix is different between the CoCo and the Dragon, but they both have the ROM call at the same place, and it translates them back out so that you are checking for a specific letter. It will be compatible, so that's cool. The randomization routine, to generate a random sequence for the numbers or for the tones and colors, uses a linear feedback shift register. This is a recurring theme in my code for that sort of task. An LFSR, or linear feedback shift register, is a sort of a mathematical construct. You actually can build them physically if you so desire for blinking LEDs or something. But it basically is just it shifts a bit down a line of a larger number, and then recombines some of those bits back into the resulting quantity. And so that you produce a value that, while it is not actually random, it's definitely follows a predefined sequence. Observed from the outside, the numbers sort of change in a way that makes it seem random. So it's useful for this sort of thing, like in a game or whatever. The sequence will repeat, but it's difficult to know when that's going to happen. Anyway. The tone that's played for each section of the sequence is generated with a square wave. It uses a single-bit square wave audio output from the CoCo. And the timing that's used for that is using the horizontal sync as the timing source. And it's using the sync instruction for that, rather than, it's not actually triggering the interrupt. It's just waiting for it and seeing that it occurs. So on all of that, you're actually slightly more than 1,000 lines of 6809 assembly code. So it's a pretty small program overall. Doesn't use a ton of memory, so it is tiny. Like I said, I think it's a fun little program to use. I think it's not very complicated logic or whatever, but I think it's a good use of the CoCo. It's fun. It's you sit down, you can play it. It's reasonably challenging. Most people don't get too far into Simon, really. 10 or 12 is pretty good for most folks if you can get the sequence even that long. So if you do get to 31 and win, that's pretty cool. But anyway, it's fun to play. You definitely should check it out. Of course, I'm a little biased. But as for availability, obviously the original Follow Me is available through the links to the show notes. You can both get it in the the ready-to-run binary form, which is available, I guess, both as available as a disk image or the bin program, and also as a WAV file for the cassette input. And if you want to build it, you can build it from the Git sources. It's probably built using Mamu for the time period that I built it at, but I don't know, you could probably switch it to LWSM without much trouble. And if you want to do that, send me an email if you have any trouble. I'll help you work through it. The later version, the Follow CoCo version, is available to customers of Cloud9's Mini Flash. I struck a deal with Mark and let him distribute that along with what is that other program? It's the CoCoDoku. Yeah, CoCoDoku. Those two titles are available through Cloud9 to their Mini Flash customers. If you want to load them on a Mini Flash and play them that way. And Follow CoCo has been sold as a boxed cartridge, using the red super cart cases, and with a label, and in the die cut cardboard box, emblazoned with the Retro Tinker logo. With an instruction card, shrink wrapped even. It was available at CoCo Fest for a price of $15. I've not seen any of those show up on eBay yet. I'm a little surprised. Sold, I don't know, not a lot. 10 or 15 of them, maybe a little more. I don't know. I'm currently out of them. If you do want a Follow CoCo cartridge, feel free to contact me. I will consider making some more. I'm not going to guarantee that I'm going to make any more. But anyway, if you want one, send me an email, and chances are I'll make one for you. And I probably will stick to the $15 price, although that is pretty close to a break-even price for me. And if you want to sweeten the deal with some kind of contribution to the podcast, or just tell me how great I am, or whatever, that would probably be most welcome as well. Well, so anyway, that is about all there is to say about Follow CoCo and the predecessor Follow Me. They're pretty fun games. They're, a lot like Simon, because that was the target. The technology is fairly simple. Semi-graphics mode is colorful. You can only use a few colors. Red, green, yellow, and blue, and of course black. It does make some noise. They're just tones using a square wave output, but they are there. It's a simple game. It does show a nice kind of class of gaming that I think we had pretty well represented on the CoCo back in the day, which was sort of, simple games. Of course, Simon's not a board game, but it's sort of similar to a board game in terms of complexity. But so it's sort of like having a card game or some other port of a simple game, like, Go or chess or checkers or something. It's not flashy. It's not jam-packed with lots of excitement or whatever. It's just kind of good, clean fun, and like I say, a way to put your CoCo to use. So I recommend it. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased, but you can get it through Cloud9 with their Mini Flash product, and there are some box cartridges floating around out there. You might be able to pick one off of eBay at some point, or if that's not good enough and you got to have a box cartridge, send me an email and we'll figure something out. Okay, so anyway, thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this sort of combined game and tech segment, and maybe who knows what we'll do next month. So it's kind of a weird month, but I think we're enjoying ourselves, so I hope you are too. All right, well, CoCo forever, and we'll talk to you soon. Later. Bye.
Well, good afternoon. My name's Tony Pedraza, and I am the host of the annual last Chicago CoCo Fest. We call it the last in quotes because we really don't know if we're going to have another one. And we haven't known every year for the past 17 years.
Hello, CoCo Crew. This is Mike Rowan with some audio feedback. First, congratulations on year 2 of the podcast. It's a fantastic show, and it's a very important part of the CoCo community. I look forward to every episode, and I know it takes a lot of effort to put the show together. So thanks to you both for your dedication and effort. It's much appreciated. Keep up the great work. Hopefully I'm not beating a dead horse here, but the topic of printers seems to be popping up frequently, so I thought I would share a little information to help listeners. One of the most frequent questions is about which Tandy printers still have ribbons available, so I thought I would give this a shot. First, let me make it clear, I'm limiting the discussion only to Tandy dot matrix printers and only Tandy printers that feature a built-in 4-pin serial interface. This is mainly due to the limited availability of serial to parallel interfaces. So I'm not discussing thermal printers like the TP10, which still work great, or plotters, or anything except Tandy dot matrix printers, the DMP models with the 4-pin serial interface. Now, Tandy produced 15 different DMP models that also had the 4-pin serial port that you could directly connect to your CoCo. 8 of these still have ribbons that you can obtain from various online sources. I actually did some web searches today, and I've still been able to find them. I've even purchased some of these myself recently. But how long they'll remain available is anyone's guess. Now, the models for which you can still purchase ribbons are the DMP 107, DMP 130, DMP 130A, DMP 132, DMP 133, DMP 400, DMP 420, and the DMP 440. All the models I just mentioned that start with a 1 all use the same ribbon. The 400 series, each of those has a unique ribbon, but all 3 of those are available online. And again, these are Tandy DMP printers with the 4-pin serial port, so you can directly connect it to your CoCo. So I hope that's helpful. These would probably be the best printers to look for on eBay or Craigslist or Kijiji or any other online source where you might shop for a used printer. So that's it. Long live CoCo, and back to more retro goodness with the CoCo Crew.
After these messages,
we'll be right back.
Well, that's all she wrote. We have reached the end of episode 14. If we were to title this episode, I would definitely call it The Mixed Bag Show. But I guess that's not a bad thing. Always good to shake things up once in a while. With myself traveling earlier in the month and John traveling later, I think we did all right. Also helped that Mike Rowan sent us in his audio feedback / mini text segment. Thanks for sending that in to us, Mike. You couldn't have picked a better month. And thanks goes to John for filling in my Games Corner segment. You can totally tell that was a nice smooth recording from the beach because of how calm and laid back it was. Well, I hope all of you enjoyed this episode. Thank you all for listening. We appreciate your feedback and support. Stay tuned for episode 15, where I will be reviewing a doozy for the Games Corner. I have to make up for a missing month. I'll give you one hint. It's not a game. Until next month, happy CoCoing.